The checkered floor of Romano's diner reflects the neon glow in fractured pieces of light and shadow. It is 3 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday. The August humidity presses against the windows like a living thing, thick and suffocating. The smell of stale coffee hangs in the air, mixed with the grease that has soaked into every surface for 40 years. Giovanni Conti kneels on that checkered floor, and the men who work for him, men who have buried bodies, who have ended lives, who fear nothing in this city, stand frozen in absolute terror. His daughter Emma, age 7, lies across the vinyl booth seat. Her small chest rises and falls in shallow, irregular movements. Her lips have turned the color of twilight. Her skin feels cold when he touches her forehead, and her breathing sounds like wind through an empty building. "The ambulance," Giovanni says. His voice is not the voice of the man who controls half of Chicago's underground. This voice trembles like a man losing everything. Where is the ambulance? Rocco, tall and broad-shouldered, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw, stands near the counter. His radio crackles with static, with voices giving times, distance estimates, 20 minutes, maybe more in the August traffic. 20 minutes might as well be 20 years. Gino, younger, still learning the business, his hands grip the edge of the booth so hard his knuckles have gone white. Both men have seen violence. Both have executed orders without hesitation. But a child gasping for breath is something no amount of power can fix. The night manager, a woman in her 60s with grey hair twisted into a bun, stands behind the counter with her hand over her mouth. She called emergency services 2 minutes ago. 3 minutes now. Time has become strange, elastic, stretching into infinity. Giovanni holds Emma's small hand. Her fingers are limp. "Stay with me, Emma. Stay with me. The doctors are coming. They are coming very soon." But Emma's eyes have already started to close. The door to the diner slams open. Wind from the August night rushes in, carrying the smell of rain and hot asphalt. The bell above the door crashes against the frame like a broken alarm. A woman stumbles through, and every person in the diner turns. She is wearing a delivery driver's jacket, faded to the color of old denim. The fabric hangs from her shoulders like it was made for someone twice her size. Her helmet, the kind that comes with a beat-up scooter, cracked plastic and faded logos, is still strapped under her chin. She is 24 years old but looks somehow older, worn down, as if life has been sanding her edges for years. Her face stops you. Her right eye is swollen completely shut, sealed by bruising so severe the skin has turned purple and yellow and green all at once. Her left cheekbone is marked with finger-shaped bruises. Her lip is split, blood crusting along the line where it has already begun to clot. And around her throat, pressed into her skin like a permanent tattoo, are handprints. 5 fingers on each side. Someone has choked this woman. She carries a delivery bag in one trembling hand. Inside are sandwiches that were supposed to be delivered an hour ago to an office building where no one was left to receive them. Her name is Rowan Cole. She has been driving for Romano's diner for 4 months. She earns $5.75 an hour, and she receives approximately $3 per shift in tips, though more often customers watch her hunger with the kind of indifference that comes from never having been hungry themselves. In her pocket, she has exactly $34.12. This money must last her until next Tuesday. She has calculated this very carefully. $22 for rent on her room, which is actually a closet in an apartment owned by Preston Mercer, a man whose hands leave prints that fade to yellow before they fade away completely. $12 for food. The cents do not matter because they have never fed her. But Rowan is not thinking about money right now. She sees the child. Everything else, the pain in her ribs where Preston's fists landed that afternoon, the throb in her jaw, the rawness of her throat, everything disappears. What happened? Her voice sounds shattered, like glass breaking very slowly. She drops her delivery bag. It lands on the floor with a soft thud. No one moves. "I do not know," Giovanni says. She was eating. She was fine. Then she could not breathe. She just... Emma's body convulses slightly. Her eyes roll back. Rowan does not hesitate. She has not been trained in CPR. She has never taken a first aid class. She works at a diner, delivers sandwiches on a broken scooter, and studies business administration between shifts using borrowed textbooks and a library card. Her life has offered her no opportunity to learn emergency medicine. But something in her wakes up. She moves to the booth and kneels beside Giovanni. Up close, she can see who he is. The way the men stand. The quality of his clothing, suit jacket that costs more than everything she owns, shirt with cufflinks that are probably solid gold, shoes that are polished to a mirror shine. The watch on his wrist. The absolute authority in his face despite the terror. Move, she says. It is not a request. Giovanni moves. Rowan checks Emma's airway, tilts her head back, and begins CPR. Her cracked ribs scream with each compression. She had not yet told anyone about those cracked ribs. Preston Mercer had ensured the bruising would be hidden by her clothing. That was part of the arrangement of her apartment, the reason she pays only $350 a month for a closet in a building where the walls are thin enough to hear neighbors breathing through them. But she pushes through the pain. 1 compression, 2 compressions, then breath. She breathes into the child's mouth with a tenderness that contradicts the violence she has just suffered. Again. 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 The sound of sirens approaches from 4 blocks away. The sound grows louder, closer, the Doppler effect distorting as the ambulance races toward Romano's diner. 30 seconds away. Now 20. Emma gasps. Her body stiffens, then releases. Her eyes open. Her mouth opens, and she coughs, a sound like a seal barking, desperate and alive. Emma, Giovanni says. He is on his knees beside her, his hand shaking so badly he cannot touch her without worrying he might break her. Emma, stay with me. You are okay. You are okay. Emma is gasping, crying, hyperventilating now, but she is conscious. She is breathing. She is alive. The ambulance arrives. Doors burst open. Paramedics flood in, and within seconds they have taken over, have Emma on a stretcher, oxygen mask over her face, for started, monitors beeping. The night manager moves to the side. Rocco and Gino step backward, suddenly invisible. Giovanni stands, and he turns to look at Rowan Cole. She is still on her knees on the checkered floor. Blood from her lip has dripped onto the white squares. Her breathing is shallow because of her cracked ribs. Her one visible eye is filled with tears. Thank you, Giovanni says. His voice sounds different now. It still has that bass note of absolute authority, but something else has been added to it. Something almost broken. You saved her. You saved my Emma. Rowan does not answer because there is nothing to say. She stands slowly, and pain radiates through her chest. One of the paramedics glances at her battered face, at the handprint on her throat, and his expression shifts into something more complicated than concern. You should let us look at you, the paramedic says. I am fine, Rowan says. But she is not fine. She is the opposite of fine. She is a woman who has nowhere to go at 3 in the morning except back to the closet where Preston Mercer might be waiting, might be watching, might decide that today was not the day to finish what he has started. The paramedics load Emma into the ambulance. Giovanni follows without hesitation. Rocco and Gino move toward the black SUV parked outside, the one with darkened windows and an engine that rumbles like thunder. Before Giovanni disappears into the ambulance, he turns back one final time. His eyes find Rowan's face in the fluorescent light of the diner. What is your name? He asks. Rowan, she says. Rowan Cole. Rowan Cole, he repeats. He says it like he is recording it, filing it away, making it permanent. You do not know what you have done tonight. But I will not forget this. The ambulance doors close. The sirens erupt again. the vehicles disappear into the August night, and Rowan Cole is left standing in a diner at 3 in the morning with a delivery bag full of sandwiches that no one will eat, and $34 in her pocket, and bruises covering her entire body, and the sudden knowledge that she has just saved the life of a man whose power runs deeper than she could possibly understand. But what Rowan did not yet know was that Margaret Harrington, sitting in a black sedan parked across the street, watching through binoculars, had orchestrated the very trap that put those handprints on her throat. And that saving Giovanni Conti's daughter would set off a chain of events that neither woman could control, a series of dominoes that would eventually bring down two empires and transform a delivery girl into something far more powerful than she ever imagined. The night manager approaches Rowan with a first aid kit and a cup of water. "You need to sit down, honey," she says. "But first, let us go back. Let us go back to the beginning, to understand how Rowan Cole arrived at this moment bleeding in a diner with nothing in her pockets but hope and a handful of dollars. 3 weeks earlier, the August heat pressed down on Chicago like a curse that could not be lifted. The humidity clung to everything, to the streets, to the buildings, to the skin of a 24-year-old woman named Rowan Cole as she gripped the handlebars of her beat-up scooter, navigating through the sticky night air toward her next delivery. The engine sputtered. It always sputtered. The bike had been broken in a dozen different ways for months, but broken was all she could afford. Her delivery bag sat heavy across her chest, insulated and worn, holding for sandwiches that cost more than the tip she would receive for delivering them. Rowan downshifted at a red light and pulled her nursing textbook from the side pocket of her backpack. Anatomy and Physiology, 3rd edition, pages annotated in fading pencil. The light turned green. She stuffed the book away and accelerated forward into the night. 12 hours of work today. 12 hours of driving through humid streets, smiling at customers who looked through her like she was made of glass, taking orders from a restaurant manager who paid her $12 an hour plus tips. The tips were where survival lived. The tips were everything. At 11:41 p.m., Rowan pulled up to the Meridian Tower, 42 stories of glass and steel that caught the city lights like a beacon. She locked her scooter in the loading area and took the service elevator to the 31st floor. Room 3104. A penthouse corner suite. She had delivered here before. The woman who answered the door was thin and cold, dressed in clothes that probably cost more than Rowan's monthly rent. She accepted the sandwiches without making eye contact. "That's $42, Rowan said. Her voice came out steady, trained through hundreds of these same interactions. The woman handed her $42 exact. No tip. No acknowledgement. Just the door closing like a punctuation mark on another failure. Rowan stood in the hallway for a moment, calculating. $127 for 12 hours of work. 7 sandwiches delivered. 0 tips that justified the risk of the scooter breaking down completely. She needed $2,400 by the 1st of September. Rent on the 1-bedroom apartment in the Polish Village neighborhood. That was 13 days away. The elevator hummed down through the tower. Rowan counted the floors passing, 25, 20, 15. By floor 10, she had already calculated that she would need to work 20 shifts at this rate and receive at least $30 in tips per shift to make the deadline. The numbers did not add up. They never added up. The night manager at the restaurant, a woman named Diane with kind eyes and tired shoulders, had warned her yesterday. "Preston's been asking about you. He came by at closing. Wanted to know how much you make. Wanted to know if you had any family." Preston Mercer. Rowan's landlord. The man who had owned the building for 3 years and raised the rent 4 times in that span. The man whose presence in the hallway of her apartment building made her spine tighten like a rope wound too tight. The scooter sputtered to life at the loading dock. Rowan drove toward home through streets that had emptied of everyone but night shift workers and people with nowhere else to be. The Polish Village neighborhood appeared gradually, brick buildings giving way to smaller structures, corner stores with neon signs in windows, the smell of old bread and cooking oil drifting from a bakery that had been closed for hours. Her apartment was on Ashland Avenue, above a laundromat that hummed constantly, a mechanical sound that had become the soundtrack to her survival. She climbed the external stairs to the second floor, keys already in her hand before she reached the door. Habit. Vigilance. A life that required both. The apartment was small. 350 square feet. Kitchenette, bathroom, bedroom, living room that served as her study space. The walls were thin enough to hear her neighbor's television through them, thick enough to muffle her own cries when she needed to cry alone. She locked the door behind her and set her delivery bag on the kitchen counter. The envelope sat on her bed where she had left it that morning. Brown, official, stamped with the letterhead of her landlord's office. She already knew what it said. She had opened it yesterday. A notice demanding payment of the full outstanding balance, $2,400, by September 1st or face eviction proceedings. The words were printed in a font that looked like judgment. She opened her wallet. $34 in cash. A debit card that had $11 in a checking account attached to it. A library card. A student ID from Northwestern University's nursing program, where she attended classes when her work schedule permitted, falling further behind each semester, borrowing money she did not have to pay for prerequisites that would lead to a degree she might never finish because she could not afford to finish it. The phone rang at 11:53 p.m. Preston Mercer's name appeared on the screen. She did not answer. The phone rang again. And again. And then a text message appeared, "I'm outside. Open the door." He was not outside. He was in the hallway. She heard his footsteps, heavy and deliberate, stopping in front of her door. She had left the chain lock unfastened that morning because it was broken, and broken was easier to live with than the effort of fixing it. He knocked. Not a knock, exactly. A series of aggressive raps that said his patience was exhausted and his authority was absolute. Rowan opened the door but kept the threshold sealed with her body. Preston Mercer was 53 years old and carried himself like a man who had learned that cruelty opened more doors than kindness. His smile was predatory. He wore a gold bracelet on his left wrist that caught the hallway light. "Miss Cole," he said. "We need to talk about your rent situation." "I'm working on it," Rowan said. Her voice trembled slightly. "I have another week and I'll have." "You'll have what?" He leaned against the doorframe, perfectly relaxed, perfectly certain that she had no power here. "Money appears from the sky? You suddenly get a tip from a customer who actually values your time." Silence. The correct response to cruelty was often silence. "I have an opportunity for you," Preston said. "A way to resolve this debt without eviction. Without having to move all your things into the street where they belong." He shifted his weight slightly closer. "There are people who work for me. People who handle administrative tasks. Private work. Work that pays very well. Discreet work. The kind of work that would eliminate this $2,400 problem in a single evening." Rowan understood exactly what he meant. She understood because she had heard the same offer implied in his previous visits, in the way his eyes lingered on her neck, in the casual way he mentioned that her lease contained certain flexible clauses that only he could interpret. "I'm not interested," she said. He smiled wider. "You should consider it. You have 13 days. He did not leave immediately. He stood in the hallway, letting his presence fill the space between them like a poison gas, letting her feel the weight of his control. When he finally turned and walked toward the stairs, his footsteps were unhurried, the footsteps of a man who knew she had nowhere to run. Rowan closed the door and locked it. Her hand shook as she turned the deadbolt and replaced the chain. She sat on her bed in the darkness and did what she had not done in months. She cried. Meanwhile, 40 minutes across the city, in a restaurant called Fortuna on North Michigan Avenue, Margaret Harrington sat across from Preston Mercer at a corner table. The restaurant was exclusive. The kind of place where reservations required connections and money, and the kind of discretion that made things happen without questions being asked. Margaret was 48 years old and wore her wealth like armor. Diamond earrings. A Rolex that cost more than Rowan Cole made in a year. Her hair was styled in a way that required maintenance most women could not afford. She owned 12 residential buildings in Chicago. 12. And Preston Mercer's collection operation ran through every single one of them, extracting payments from desperate people who had no one to call, no law to appeal to, no escape. The Cole girl is proving stubborn, Preston said. He drank wine from a glass the size of his fist. But she will come around. They always do. Margaret slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, documents, financial records. Proof of their partnership? Proof of the 60% of every illegal collection that Margaret received for owning the buildings where the collections happened. I want the pressure increased, she said. The medical student in 2B is about to sign a note for $40,000. The single mother in 3F needs another week before I foreclose. And the Cole girl, Margaret's eyes were cold and precise. Make her desperate enough and she will accept whatever you offer. Desperation is the most reliable currency. Preston smiled. She's already desperate. She just doesn't know it yet. The next day, Rowan reported for her shift at the restaurant at 11 in the morning. The lunch crowd was thin. She served 3 tables and earned $8 in tips. The day passed like every other day, a slow accumulation of small failures that added up to something that looked like living but felt like slowly running out of oxygen. At 6 in the evening, she was leaving her shift when Preston Mercer appeared in the parking lot behind the restaurant. He was not alone. 2 men stood with him, the kind of men who existed in the spaces between law and consequence. One of them held a folder. Miss Cole, Preston said. I wanted to make sure you understood the seriousness of your situation. This is an eviction notice. It will be filed with the court tomorrow unless we come to an arrangement. Rowan's stomach dropped. Tomorrow? You said I had 13 days. I changed my mind, he said. His voice was pleasant, conversational. Circumstances change. Landlords have the right to accelerate timelines. You would know that if you had read your lease more carefully. He stepped closer. I am giving you until tomorrow night. 24 hours. Either bring me $2,400 or the paperwork gets filed and you have until Friday to vacate the premises. That's not legal, Rowan said. Her voice sounded very small. That's not how eviction works. The smile never left his face. Call the police. Tell them your landlord is trying to evict you. Ask them if they care about a property dispute. Ask them how long it takes for the courts to resolve anything. Ask yourself if you have $2,400 for a lawyer. He dropped the eviction notice in the parking lot at her feet. 24 hours. He left. The 2 men left with him. Rowan stood alone in the parking lot with a piece of paper in her hand and the knowledge that she was running out of time faster than she had calculated. That night, she drove her scooter to the northwestern campus and sat in the nursing library until it closed. She did not study. She sat in a carrel and stared at the walls and tried to think of solutions that did not exist. She could ask her mother for money. Her mother, who lived in Milwaukee and had made it clear 17 years ago that Rowan was a mistake she could not afford to support. She could drop out of her program and find a second job. She could borrow money from a loan shark and enter a cycle of debt that would take decades to escape. Or she could accept Preston's offer. That was what he wanted her to think. That was the entire point of the accelerated timeline. The goal was not to evict her. The goal was to break her will until she had no choice but to surrender. At 3 in the morning, sitting in her apartment with her textbooks spread across the bed untouched, Rowan heard footsteps in the hallway outside her door. Heavy footsteps. Deliberate. The kind of footsteps that carried intent. Preston appeared at her door without knocking. He had let himself in with his master key, and she had not heard it because she was too exhausted to hear anything anymore. I wanted to give you a final opportunity to reconsider, he said. I have clients. Important clients. Men who prefer discretion and efficiency. Men who would pay very well for someone who understands the importance of following instructions without questions. No, Rowan said. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. Please leave. He closed the distance between them in 2 steps. His hand reached out and cupped her jaw, his fingers pressing against her cheekbones with enough force to hurt. You do not understand your position, he said. His voice was still pleasant. Still conversational. Still absolutely certain of his power. You are alone. No family. No money. No protection. You are nothing but a problem that needs to be solved. Rowan tried to pull away. His other hand came up and wrapped around her throat, fingers digging into her windpipe. She gasped. The room began to spin. She saw stars burst across her vision like fireworks. This is what happens when you refuse reasonable offers, he said. His grip tightened. This is what happens when you forget that I own you. He released her after 10 seconds that felt like 10 years. Rowan collapsed backward onto her bed, gasping for air, her throat burning like fire. Preston wiped his hand on his pants like he had touched something contaminated. 24 hours, he said. Then he was gone. Rowan lay on her bed in the darkness, her hand pressed against her throat, and understood that she had arrived at the end of her options. In 24 hours, her life would either transform into something unthinkable or it would end entirely. She did not know that across the city, in a mansion on the North Shore, Giovanni Conti sat alone in a nursery that he had not touched in 7 years. The room belonged to his daughter, Emma, who had died from a congenital heart condition at age 8. The drawings still hung on the walls. The toys still sat on the shelves. One drawing in particular, a crayon rendering of a family standing in front of a house, sun shining overhead, the word home written in uneven letters, sat in a frame on the nightstand. Giovanni was 52 years old, and that drawing was the most valuable thing he owned. Worth more than his empire. Worth more than his life. He did not know that in 19 hours, a woman he had never met would save his life, and that saving would set in motion a series of events that would tear apart 2 separate empires and transform a girl with $34 in her pocket into something far more powerful than survival itself. The rain began to fall on Chicago at midnight. The August heat clung to Chicago like a living thing, suffocating, humid, turning the air itself into something you had to push through to breathe. It was 11:56 p.m. when Rowan Cole's scooter engine began to sputter on the Kennedy Expressway, the sound like a dying animal gasping for its last breath. Rain hammered down in sheets so thick she could barely see the road ahead, her vision already compromised by the swelling around her left eye, that eye nearly sealed shut now, the purple bruising spreading across her cheekbone like a dark flower blooming in fast motion. She had $34 in her pocket. That was all. $34 to her name in the entire world. The scooter coughed once, twice, then died completely. Rowan coasted to the shoulder, her wet hands gripping the handlebars, and the engine went silent except for the sound of the rain, endless and relentless, drumming against the metal beneath her. Thunder cracked across the sky like the world was splitting open. She sat there for a moment, perfectly still, her chest rising and falling, her breath coming in shallow gasps because even breathing hurt with the fractured rib, the one the emergency room doctor had diagnosed 3 days ago after Preston's last visit. She tried the ignition again. Nothing. The engine was dead. Rowan swung her leg off the scooter and stood on the shoulder of the highway, the rain soaking through her red delivery uniform, the fabric clinging to her skin like a second skin made of ice. Her phone was dead. The battery had died 6 hours ago, and she had no charger, could not afford to replace the cracked screen, much less buy a new one. She was alone on a flooded highway at midnight with nothing but a dead scooter and $34 and the understanding that Preston Mercer had given her an ultimatum that morning, his hand around her throat, his breath hot against her ear. 24 hours, he had said. $65,000 or she would disappear. Rowan began to walk. The rain fell in diagonal sheets, and the overpass ahead seemed impossibly distant, seemed to recede the closer she moved toward it. Her shoes, cheap canvas things that were falling apart at the seams, squelched with water. The swollen eye made everything look distorted, like she was viewing the world through a kaleidoscope that was slowly destroying itself. She walked for what felt like an hour but was probably only 15 minutes, her breath coming harder, her entire body trembling with cold and fear and something deeper, something that tasted like the end of all things. Headlights appeared behind her, and Rowan heard the sound of engines, multiple engines, powerful and deep, like mechanical thunder rolling toward her through the night. She stumbled forward, confused, disoriented, her good eye trying to focus on what was happening. The vehicles were slowing, and there were so many of them, 5 black SUVs moving in perfect formation, and Rowan realized in a moment of pure panic that she had wandered into the center lane, that she was standing directly in their path. She tried to move, but her legs would not obey. The first SUV swerved violently, tires screaming against wet asphalt, and Rocco, a man with a scarred face and shoulders like a linebacker, threw open the passenger door and stepped out into the rain, his hand moving to his waist where a gun hung like a second heartbeat. But then he saw her face. In the glow of the headlights, Rowan Cole became visible. A girl, she could not have been more than 25, though she looked decades older, her face swollen and bruised, her neck decorated with handprints like purple tattoos, her eye nearly sealed shut, her uniform torn at the shoulder, her entire body shaking like a tree in a storm. She was not a threat. She was a victim. She was barely conscious. Rocco lowered his hand from his gun and stepped back, creating space. The rear door of the lead SUV opened, and Giovanni Conti emerged into the August rain. He was a man of 52 years with silver threading through his dark hair, a man whose face held the architecture of power, of consequence, of decisions that had altered the trajectories of other people's lives. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Rowan's annual rent, and a white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the broad chest of someone who had spent his entire life commanding the space around him. He stood for 2 seconds, just observing her, his dark eyes taking in every detail of her injuries with the precision of someone trained to assess threats and weaknesses. What he saw was not a threat. What he saw was a girl with $34 and a face that belonged in a hospital. "Get her inside," he said, and his voice was like thunder, like something that had the weight of consequence behind every syllable. "Gino, move the vehicles. We do not stop on the highway." Gino, younger than Rocco, with slicked back hair and a gold watch that reflected the headlights, was already moving. Rocco approached Rowan carefully, as if she were a spooked animal, and guided her toward the SUV with a gentleness that contradicted everything his appearance suggested. She did not resist. She could not resist. She allowed herself to be placed in the back seat, and as the vehicle pulled away from the shoulder and merged back into traffic, Rowan stared out the window and watched the rain streak across the glass like tears. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the whisper of the windshield wipers and the distant rumble of thunder moving across the city toward Lake Michigan. Giovanni sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, far enough away that she did not feel threatened. He did not touch her. He simply sat there, observing her with an intensity that made her want to disappear entirely into the leather seat. His men, Rocco and Gino in the front, exchanged glances in the rearview mirror, the kind of looks that communicated volumes without a single word being spoken. "What is your name?" Giovanni asked, and his voice was gentler now, stripped of the command structure that had ordered her into the vehicle. "Rowan," she whispered. "Rowan Cole." The SUV continued through the rain-soaked streets of Chicago, past closed storefronts and empty intersections, until it arrived at a small diner 3 blocks away, the only establishment open at 3 in the morning, the neon sign in the window casting everything in shades of electric blue and pink. The checkered floor was visible through the glass, and the smell of stale coffee and burned grease hit them immediately as Giovanni guided Rowan inside. He seated her in a booth in the corner, positioned so that she could see the entire restaurant but nobody could approach without him knowing. His men stood near the entrance, their presence subtle but undeniable, their eyes constantly moving, constantly assessing. Giovanni ordered coffee without asking what she wanted, and when it arrived, he placed it in front of her and watched as her hands wrapped around the cup, shaking so badly that the liquid inside rippled like a tiny dark ocean. "Who did this to you?" he asked. Rowan's damaged eye remained fixed on the coffee cup. "Nobody," she said, and the word sounded like a lie even to her own ears. "It does not matter." "It matters," Giovanni said, and something in the tone of his voice made her believe him. It always matters. She was about to respond when the sound came from the booth behind them, a small, high-pitched sound, almost like a bird, and then a child's voice crying out in pain. Giovanni's entire body went rigid. He stood immediately, and Rocco was already moving, already checking for threats, already assessing what was happening. In the booth directly behind Rowan, a small girl, no more than 7 years old, with dark hair and Giovanni's exact same eyes, was clutching her chest, her face contorted with pain, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. She was gasping like a fish pulled from water, like she could not find enough oxygen in the air to sustain her. Emma, Giovanni breathed, and the name escaped his lips like a prayer and a curse combined. Rowan turned, saw the child in distress, and something ancient and instinctive took over. She moved without thinking, moving from the booth, kneeling beside the small girl, placing her hand on the child's small back. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey, look at me. Can you look at me?" Emma's eyes found Rowan's, and in that moment, something extraordinary happened. The pain in the child's expression shifted, became secondary to the fascination of looking at this strange woman with the swollen face and the gentle voice. Rowan guided her breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth, steady and slow, and after 60 seconds, after 90 seconds, the child's breathing began to normalize, began to return to something resembling normal. Giovanni stood above them, his hands trembling, his face drained of all color. He had not seen his daughter in an episode in 3 weeks. He had been delaying her surgery, the $200,000 procedure that the cardiologist said was necessary, because the thought of losing her on an operating table, of having her collapse like this in a hospital where everyone was watching, was a weight he could not carry. But watching a stranger comfort her, watching this broken girl kneel beside his daughter and guide her back to safety, watching Rowan Cole save his child's life with nothing but her voice and her presence, something in Giovanni's chest broke open. Emma's eyes remained on Rowan even as her breathing stabilized, and she reached out one small hand, placing it against Rowan's swollen cheek with the innocence of a child who did not understand that touch could hurt. "You are hurt," Emma said, her voice small but clear. "I am," Rowan agreed, and tears spilled from her good eye. "But I am okay now." "Why are you crying if you are okay?" Emma asked, and the question was so perfectly simple, so perfectly honest, that Rowan had no answer to give. Giovanni knelt beside both of them, his expensive suit absorbing the stale coffee smell of the diner floor, his men watching from their posts with expressions of complete shock. In 15 years of working for Giovanni Conti, they had never seen him kneel for anything. They had never seen him vulnerable. They had never seen him choose anything over the commands of his empire. "Come with me," Giovanni said to Rowan, and it was not a request. "Both of you. Come with me now." The rain continued to fall on Chicago as the black SUVs pulled away from the diner, carrying a broken girl with $34 in her pocket, a 7-year-old child with a heart condition, and a man who had just realized that his entire understanding of power was about to be fundamentally altered. What Giovanni did not know was that Margaret Harrington, elegant and calculating, with her silk blouse and her cold smile, was already watching. What Rowan did not know was that Preston Mercer had associates, that her disappearance into the penthouse of one of Chicago's most dangerous men would not go unnoticed. What neither of them knew was that the next 72 hours would determine whether salvation or destruction had arrived on that rain-soaked highway at midnight. The humid August night pressed down on Chicago like a coffin lid, and Rowan Cole stood in the hallway of her old apartment building with her hands trembling, rain-soaked clothes clinging to her skin. 3 days. 3 days since Giovanni had pulled her from that diner floor, since Emma's small hand had touched her bruised cheek, since the black SUVs had carried them both away from everything she knew. 3 days of safety. 3 days of breathing without fear. And now she had returned here alone, to retrieve the textbook scattered in her apartment, the one she needed for the exam that would change everything. She had refused the guards Giovanni offered. "I need to do this myself," she had said, and he had watched her with those dark eyes that seemed to see through her skin to the terror underneath, but he had nodded. He understood that some battles had to be fought in solitude. The stairwell was dark. The light bulb on the 4th-floor landing had been broken for months, and no landlord cared enough to fix it. Rowan climbed slowly, each step an echo, her backpack heavy against her shoulders. The smell of mold hung in the air like a curse, thick and suffocating. When she reached her door, her key trembled in the lock. But the door swung open before she could turn it. Preston Mercer stood in the darkness of her apartment, and beside him, elegant and terrible in a navy silk blouse that cost more than everything Rowan owned, stood Margaret Harrington. Her blonde hair was perfectly arranged. Her smile was a blade wrapped in ice. "I wondered when you would come back," Preston said, his voice soft and poisoned. His hand shot out and grabbed Rowan's wrist, yanking her inside with a force that sent pain screaming up her arm. He slammed her against the wall, and the impact drove the air from her lungs. "You think Giovanni Conti protects you?" Rowan gasped, struggling, but his grip was iron. His face was inches from hers, and she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "He uses people," Preston hissed, his fingers digging deeper into her wrist. "He discards them when they become inconvenient. You are nothing. A delivery girl. A beggar. When he is finished with you, he will throw you away like garbage, and you will have brought this pain on yourself." Margaret stepped forward, her heels clicking on the apartment's worn linoleum. Her arms crossed over her chest, and her expression held the casual cruelty of someone who had never known desperation. "I own 12 buildings in this city," she said, her voice like honey poured over broken glass. "Hundreds of girls like you, all of them far more beautiful, far more useful, far more grateful for the opportunities one provided." She paused, letting her words settle like poison. "I will destroy you if you speak about our arrangement. Completely. Utterly. I will ruin your mother's name, I will ensure Emma never receives her surgery, I will make certain that every door closes." Rowan tried to wrench free from Preston's grip. She opened her mouth to scream, but he struck her across the face with his other hand, a blow that sent her vision spinning and reopened the cut on her lip. She tasted blood. She collapsed to the floor, her knees striking the cold tile, and the pain was nothing compared to the breaking of her spirit. Margaret raised her phone and took photographs and videos as Rowan bled onto the floor. "Evidence," Margaret said calmly, her voice like a judge pronouncing sentence. "Of your instability. Your unreliability. If you speak about us, about our arrangement, we release this footage to every social services agency in Illinois. We claim you attacked us. We have lawyers who cost more than your life is worth. Do you understand me?" They left her there, bleeding and gasping, the door closing behind them with a sound like a coffin being sealed. The rain drummed against the window with savage persistence. Rowan sat on the cold apartment floor, her hand shaking as blood dripped from her lip onto the threadbare carpet that had absorbed so much of her despair over the years. The humid August air was suffocating, pressing down on her chest, making each breath feel like drowning. She stared at her trembling hands, at the blood on her skin, and felt something inside her beginning to fracture. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was nobody. Maybe she should disappear before she brought danger to Emma, before she ruined the only chance that child would ever have for a normal life. Before she dragged Giovanni and his empire into her broken reality and destroyed him the way she destroyed everything she touched. Her phone lay on the floor beside her. Giovanni's number was saved in her contacts. She reached for it with a hand that did not feel like her own, her finger hovering over the call button. But she could not press it. The walls of the apartment seemed to close in, suffocating her, and the darkness outside the window was absolute. She stood on shaking legs and walked to the window. 6 floors below, the Chicago streets were slick with rain, and the pavement looked soft, like water, like a place where pain could finally end. She opened the window. The rain-soaked air rushed in, cold and alive. She gripped the windowsill, her knuckles white, her vision blurring with tears. And then she saw it. The corner of Emma's drawing peeked out from her jacket pocket, the one the girl had pressed into her hands before they left the penthouse. Rowan pulled it out with trembling fingers and unfolded it on the windowsill. Emma had drawn them together. Crayon lines forming figures, one tall, one small, holding hands. Above the tall figure, written in childish letters, Rowan. And beside the figure, Emma had drawn a red heart, oversized and hopeful, the way children draw love before the world teaches them better. Rowan stared at those crayon lines. She thought of Emma's voice asking, "Why are you crying if you are okay?" She thought of that small hand touching her bruised cheek. She thought of a child who had been abandoned, who had a failing heart, who had learned to love anyway. Something inside Rowan refused to break. Some part of her that had survived Preston's hands, that had survived hunger and theft and degradation, rose up like a blade cutting through the darkness. She stepped back from the window. She wiped her face. She pulled out her phone with steady hands now, and she called Giovanni. His voice answered on the first ring. "Rowan." "They came," she said, and her voice no longer trembled. "They came to the apartment. Preston and Margaret. They told me if I speak, they will destroy Emma's surgery, they will ruin everything." There was a sound of movement on the other end of the line. The sound of a man who had just made a decision that would reshape entire lives. "Stay there," Giovanni said, his voice deep and solid like an oath. "Stay exactly where you are. Breathe. Do not move. I am coming. Giovanni, if you do this, if you fight them, they will. Breathe, Rowan," he repeated. "Just breathe." 30 minutes later, the sound came, not the sound of sirens, but something quieter, more terrifying. The sound of footsteps on the apartment building stairs, measured and unhurried. 15 men in black suits moved like ghosts through the corridors, their presence transforming the shabby hallway into something holy and terrible. Rocco led the tactical team, his movements precise and practiced, followed by Gino, whose expression held the cold clarity of a man executing a plan. Giovanni came behind them, his cashmere coat wet with rain, and when he saw Rowan standing in her apartment doorway with blood on her lip and fear in her eyes, his face transformed into something that his men had never seen before. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and pulled her against his chest, and she could feel him breathing, feel the rapid beating of his heart, feel the barely contained rage coursing through him. "You will never be hurt again," he said into her hair. "Not while I draw breath." Giovanni pulled out his phone and made a single call. He spoke only 8 words, "I am turning them into the FBI." The federal agents arrived at Preston Mercer's office at dawn, their badges gleaming, their vehicles blocking the entire block. They found the financial records hidden in his desk drawer, the ledgers that documented every girl he had exploited, every apartment he had controlled, every threat he had made. They found Margaret Harrington's communications with him, emails that detailed their partnership in cruelty. Preston Mercer collapsed to his knees when the agents placed handcuffs on his wrists. He trembled like a cornered animal, his voice breaking as he begged for a deal, his pride stripped away as completely as if he had been standing naked on Michigan Avenue. He wept. He confessed. He named every accomplice, every tenant he had threatened, every girl he had victimized. Margaret Harrington was arrested during a charity gala, her moment of humiliation broadcast live on news cameras, photographers flashing like lightning as officers led her away in handcuffs. Her silk blouse was torn. Her hair was disheveled. Her face was a mask of shock, unable to comprehend that her wealth and connections could not save her from consequences. Within 1 hour, the video of her arrest had been viewed by 500,000 people. By morning, 2 million. By the end of the week, every news outlet in the country had broadcast the story. Her name became synonymous with exploitation. Her photograph was used in articles about predators. Her investors, her allies, her business partners abandoned her in a cascade of withdrawals and cancelled contracts. Preston Mercer received 40 years in federal prison for extortion, assault, and racketeering. Margaret Harrington received 60 years. Their properties were seized. Their accounts were frozen. The money was distributed to the hundreds of girls they had victimized, each one receiving restitution that allowed them to begin healing. Giovanni ensured every tenant who had been threatened received compensation. He hired lawyers to help them file lawsuits. He established a legal defense fund for victims of housing exploitation across Chicago. Death would have been too quick, too easy, too merciful for what they deserved. This systematic destruction, this public humiliation, this systematic removal of everything they had built on the suffering of others, this was justice in its truest form. And as Preston Mercer sat in a federal prison cell, stripped of everything except his guilt, he finally understood what he had never grasped before, that the girl he had thought was nobody had been somebody all along. 1 year had passed since the night the sky split open and changed everything. Rowan Cole stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her own penthouse, 47 stories above Chicago, the skyline glittering like scattered diamonds below her. The humid August air that had nearly drowned her a year ago now felt like a memory from someone else's life. She wore a pressed white coat with her name embroidered on the pocket, Dr. Rowan Cole, RN, Clinic Director. The words still felt like they belonged to someone else. Her nursing degree hung framed on the wall behind her, next to a photo of Emma, now 8 years old, gap-toothed and laughing. Emma had survived the surgery. Survived it completely. The medical bills that had been crushing her had vanished like smoke the moment Giovanni's people moved into action. $60,000 erased. The rest had come from the restitution fund, money seized from Preston Mercer and Margaret Harrington's frozen accounts, distributed to every girl they had victimized. The clinic had opened 6 months ago in a converted warehouse on the south side. No appointments required. No insurance needed. Sliding scale for those who could pay, free for those who could not. Rowan had treated 283 patients in the first month alone. Girls like her? Women like her. The invisible ones. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Emma appeared in the doorway, a whirlwind of motion, her dark hair tied with the blue ribbon Rowan had given her. She held a drawing up to the light. "Vivi, look. I made this for you. It is us. Here is you, and here is me, and here is Papa, and here is the dog we are going to get." Rowan knelt down. Emma was still small, still learning that the world could be safe. But she was learning. "It is beautiful, Mija. Absolutely beautiful." Rowan pulled her close, breathed in the child's hair, felt the small heartbeat against her chest. A year ago, this girl had been on an operating table. Now she smelled like strawberry shampoo and possibility. "Can Papa get me the dog?" "Can he?" "He said he would if I asked you nicely." "We will see. Dogs are a big responsibility." Emma nodded seriously, accepting this as an adult answer. She ran back down the hallway, the drawing still clutched in her hand, calling for someone named Marco, one of Giovanni's men who had begun teaching her piano. Rowan returned to the window. Giovanni appeared in the doorway an hour later, after Emma had finally fallen asleep. He wore a charcoal suit, tailored to his broad shoulders, a silver watch catching the light as he held a glass of water. His face was harder than it had been, lined deeper. A year of legitimate business, a year of shutting down the old networks, a year of building something legal from something violent, it had aged him. He had stayed distant this entire year. He had visited only when Emma insisted, only when she cried for him. He had ensured that Rowan built her life on her own terms, that no one could ever say she owed him anything, that his shadow did not consume her light. It was, she had realized over the long months, the most powerful thing he could have done. But tonight he came because the silence was unbearable. "You are awake," he said, and his voice was the same as always, like thunder wrapped in velvet. She turned from the window. The city reflected in her eyes. "I need to tell you something I have carried for 1 year," he said. He did not step closer. He maintained the distance between them like it mattered. "That night on the highway, when I found you broken and bleeding in that diner at 3 in the morning, I saw someone who had every reason to give up but refused to. I saw someone who saved my daughter with her last breath, when she had nothing left to give. And I realized that a nobody delivery girl had taught the most powerful man in the city what it means to be powerless." He paused. His hand tightened on the glass. "I have been waiting a year to tell you this. I have loved you since that night. I love you now. I will love you after the sky falls and the earth opens. I love you." Rowan's breath caught. Tears formed. 1 year of building, 1 year of healing, 1 year of becoming someone, and he had let her do it alone. I was nobody, she whispered. I had $34 and a broken scooter. You were never nobody to me. You were everything. You are everything. She closed the distance between them. When she kissed him, the city watched from below, thousands of windows dark, millions of people sleeping, unaware that in this penthouse, a delivery girl and a mafia boss were rewriting what love could mean. 1 month later, they stood together in the same clinic where Rowan had treated her first patient. Giovanni wore a suit without the usual weight of violence in his shoulders. He had begun visiting schools, speaking to students about second chances. The organization had pivoted entirely. Real estate holdings were being converted into affordable housing. His restaurants, his legitimate businesses, were now the only businesses. The underworld had been systematically dismantled and replaced with something that looked almost like redemption. Emma called Rowan Mom now, not quietly, not when she thought no one was listening, but openly, in front of everyone. Last week, she had introduced Rowan to her teacher as her mommy, and when Rowan looked at Giovanni, she saw tears in his eyes for perhaps the second time since she had known him. Preston Mercer sat in a federal prison cell in Illinois. His hands, which had left prints on her throat, were now useless. His mouth, which had made threats, now formed apologies no one heard. The investigators had found records of 23 other girls. 23. Margaret had helped him choose them, the poor ones, the vulnerable ones, the ones with no one to scream for them. The predators had built their empire on invisible suffering. Margaret Harrington received 60 years. Preston Mercer received 40. Their properties had been seized, their accounts frozen, their names transformed into cautionary tales. Universities used their case studies now. Law enforcement agencies wrote manuals about their network. They had become not powerful but infamous, not feared but despised. A letter arrived at the clinic one Tuesday afternoon. Rowan recognized the prison stamps immediately. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was not from Mercer. It was from another victim, a girl named Sophia, 19 years old, who had been trapped in the scheme for 8 months before Margaret's arrest freed her. Sophia wrote about the restitution money. About the lawyer Giovanni had hired. About how she had finally left Chicago, finally felt safe, finally enrolled in community college. She wrote, because you had the courage to speak, 147 girls were freed. 147. You did that. You changed everything. Rowan wept. She held the letter to her chest and wept. Giovanni found her on the clinic floor, surrounded by case files, surrounded by the weight of what they had survived and what they had saved. He knelt beside her, wrapped his arm around her, and together they sat in the quiet of that small room where broken people came to heal. I was nobody, Rowan said again. You were never nobody. You were the person strong enough to survive what would have destroyed anyone else. You were the person brave enough to speak when silence was safer. You were the person who loved my daughter when she had already stopped believing in love. You were everything. She pressed her forehead against his and understood, finally, that this was what power looked like when it was used for something other than destruction. The rain came that evening, heavy and warm, the kind that breaks a Chicago August. Water streamed down the clinic windows. Lightning illuminated the empty streets. And when the storm passed, the sky cleared, stars emerging one by one, and sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes they come from a girl with $34 and a broken scooter. Sometimes they come from the man strong enough to kneel before her. If this story moved you, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe because tomorrow we bring you another story of courage, redemption, and love. Comment below, what would you have done in Rowan's place? Would you have had the strength to speak? Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Remember, you are never as powerless as you think. After the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.